Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the January 2020 Nextier Power Dialogue with the theme Review of the Nigeria Electricity Market Reform Landscape. It's an honor and privilege to have you in the room. Nextier Power Dialogue is a platform we put together to share ideas on how to fix the power sector. We also hope to use this to create a networking opportunity, for people who are interested in doing business in the sector.
Hi, how are you?
Quite importantly, to advocate policy positions to advance progress in the sector. To join me in this discourse this evening, three very eminent persons, and I'd like to invite them to join me on stage. Barrister Jumoke Delano. A round of applause for her. Barrister Delano is currently the Director, Legal Services and Company Secretary at Abuja Electricity Distribution Company. She's got over 23 years experience, successfully acted as legal advisor across various sectors. She holds a master's in banking and finance law from Queen Mary College, University of London, and is qualified as a solicitor in England, Wales, and attorney and counsel at law in the state of New York. Please, a round of applause for her. Barrister Eyo Ebo. I saw him. If you can join me on stage, please. Eyo was the Commissioner of Market Rates and Competition at Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC, where he oversaw the creation of efficient and competitive market structures through fair pricing in Nigeria electricity supply industry. Mayoga?
Which one?
You.
Okay.
Since leaving the sector, he joined the private sector in 2001. He joined the public service and served in various capacities, including team lead, power sector reform team at the Bureau of Public Enterprises, and later team leader, gas and petrochemicals in the same organization. He was a former special advisor and commissioner for justice, as well as a former special advisor for special projects in the office of the governor of Cross River State. Currently, he's a director at New Frontier Development Limited. A round of applause for Eyo Ebo. Last, definitely not the least, Engineer Frank Edozie. A round of applause. He's a team lead power component of the UK Nigeria Infrastructure Advisory Facility. Until recently, he was the chief executive of Nekonde Energy, an indigenous company that operates, explores, and produces oil and gas reserves in Nigeria. From 2015 to 2017, Frank was a senior power consultant at Nigeria Infrastructure Advisory Facility. Prior to that, he was a senior special advisor gas to the Nigerian Minister of Power between 2013 and 15. He was also a member of the team in 2013 that developed the Nigeria's 30-year National Integrated Infrastructure Master Plan. A round of applause for Frank.
Thank you.
So essentially what we want to do today is answer a few questions. The objective of the dialogue would be to reevaluate the strategies and assumptions of the power sector reform process, identify areas of success as well as misalignments in the power sector reform process, and provide recommendations, and forecast, if any, mid-term and long-term directions for the sector, and realign same for reform strategy. If you permit me just 2 minutes to give a broad overview, very sweeping overview of where we've been in the sector. Nigeria's electricity supply industry has been transforming for a few decades. You can look at it in 4 stages. The pre-transitional stage, 1972 to 2005. In 2005, we got into the transitional stage, which ran up to 2013 when the privatization happened. The midterm, from 2013 to date, and then you've got the long term, which is yet to commence. Between 2005 to date, a number of critical issues have been achieved in the sector. The formation of PHCN in 2005, unbundling in 2006 into the successor companies. In 2007, the 7-point agenda, 2008, Power Sector Master Plan, and MITO was introduced. In 2010, BP started the process of trying to sell the successor companies. In 11, a number of those companies were shortlisted to acquire the PHCN assets. 2012, 10 distribution companies, preferred bidders for 10 distribution companies and 5 generation companies, issuance of MITO 2, the tariff, management contract for Manitoba Hydro and TCN. By 2013, we privatized and signed some MOUs for the coal power generation. 2014, 10 NIPP assets, preferred bidders were announced. Government created the $213 billion bailout fund for the sector, which was at the time said to reset the sector. In 2016, we commenced the transitional electricity market, issuance of MITO 2.1. Another $701 billion was created by the government, again, to reset the sector. And then the creation of the Power Sector Recovery Plan. A number of things have also happened since then. We might get into some of those discussions as we go along. In the face of everything that has happened, the sector has failed to deliver enough power commensurate with what has gone into the sector. But it's not all doom and gloom. A few things have been achieved. Privatization that we kind of take for granted today was won through tears and blood and sweat. But it has also enabled the creation of policies that encourage off-grid, mini-grid, embedded captive generation, eligible customer declaration, franchising, increased focus on electricity generation through renewable energy sources. NERC and the National Assembly are beginning to make more drastic reform efforts to improve the rate of development of the sector. The National Assembly is in the process of passing a bill to stop estimated billing, which has become one of the biggest issues or topics, between the discos and electricity customers, probably even one of the biggest sources of corruption in the sector. And this bill has passed third reading. So we think that there's growth coming. It's not coming fast enough. For anybody who's sitting in the room who lives in Nigeria, we know that. So today, the basis for this discussion is we want to understand what the current administration needs to do to jumpstart the economy and deliver the 6 to 8% GDP growth that we expect for this country. In the face of the 1.9 to 2.3% GDP growth that IMF and the World Bank estimate that we're going to see from now to 2023. So what do we need to do, to get ahead of those numbers? Whatever it is has to pass through the gates of power supply. Are the policies we have today the right policies to drive increased power generation, distribution, transmission? If not, what should we do? Is the problem the policy, or is it just sheer implementation? Is it a problem of corruption? If yes, what should we do? That's what we've gathered this eminent panel and yourselves, to discuss tonight. So permit me to start with Barrister Delano to make her opening remarks for about 5 minutes or less. And I'll go through the panelists who make their opening remarks, and then we have what I expect to be a heated discussion. Lively discussion. Yeah.
I prefer lively. Good evening, and esteemed members of the audience. Indeed, the power sector is an interesting one. I must say that working in the power sector has been, for me, the most fascinating job I've ever had. Having worked for 23 years, the 5 years plus I've spent in the power sector has been the most fulfilling. Now, I say it's the most fulfilling, not because we're there yet, but we can see the fact that this problem needs to be solved. The power sector indeed has many challenges. But with challenges come opportunities. Opportunities to solve those challenges in order to galvanize the economic development of this nation. I still have a firm conviction that we can still, win the battle of putting the power sector on the right course in order to ensure that this country, is set on the right path. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Permit me to Eyo Ekpo, who's worked first as a regulator, or well, first as a practitioner in the industry on the policy side, then as a regulator, and now you're running a consulting firm that continues to work in the sector. In 5 minutes, a broad overview of where we've been, where we're going, and how we need to get there.
Okay. First, thank you for having me once again as a panelist, and good evening to all of us who are here gathered. How does one talk about the power sector in 5 minutes?
I don't know.
I don't know myself, so let me just take a stab at it. So let's start with intentions. All right. We know what the sector was like before 2005, before 2013, when there was privatization. Many of us think it's still the same, but it's not. The mere fact that you have, I'm not sure that you have many people from the public sector in this audience. Not many. If we were having a discussion about the power sector 10 years ago, 5 years ago, most of us would be from the public sector, and probably would be talking to themselves. So the mere fact that you have much more diverse, more varied, popular involvement in the sector, I think is something that we should recognize as one of the key objectives of what was supposed to be a reform process that would bring about a number of key objectives. One of the biggest of those key objectives was the fact that we would finally have a market, right? And a market is something that all of us seated here who are Nigerians, and probably even if non-Nigerians, understand. It's a place where we go and buy and sell. And every single one of us comes from a community that has a market. Is the power sector a market? I'm not so sure, because we don't yet buy and sell willingly and exchange cash for energy, and those who sell energy go home happy. So if you don't have that, if you don't have the basic satisfaction that we have a market in our villages, in the electricity sector, then we don't have a market yet. So let me get to the end. We haven't yet achieved, we haven't yet got to the El Dorado. But between what was meant to be a power sector reform process and the outcome, there have been many twists in the tail, and I hope that we will touch on some of them. But I would say that first you had that key objective of establishing a market, and associated with that was changing the governance model of the sector, which was essentially public sector driven. So Federal Ministry of Power, NEPA, take all the decisions. And as we all know, state-owned monopolies hardly ever have any consideration for what the people themselves want. You serve a totally different set of incentives, or you are driven by a totally different set of incentives and serve a totally different kind of master, which is certainly not the public. So change that governance model and separate a number of key roles, policy, regulation, and then of course operation, which were all centered in one entity. What that was meant to do was to bring about a situation whereby you could address popular concerns, the need for energy, much more. Many of us seem to think that electricity is a right. It's not, with all due respect. We don't have a right to it, just as much as we don't have a right to buy a loaf of bread, right? It's a commodity. And we haven't, many of us also haven't yet got our heads around what that means. The fact that power, electricity, has to be manufactured means that someone has to bring input together, to put together, to establish a product or to create a product that is then sold. It has implications. And unfortunately, we seem to think, many of us, that it's something that is akin to the national cake, which belongs to everybody and needs to be shared, regardless of whether you need it, want it, or are able to pay for it. So that's another issue. But along the line, I have learned also something about the process, and I'm touching here on a number of things that the power sector implicates for us. The privatization. I've come to realize that privatization is 99% politics, and or 99.99% politics and 0.01% economics. Because what you are doing is taking the levers of power. In this case, not electricity, but real power. The power to change people's lives, to get things done. And handing it over to certain people chosen by a process. No government allows that to happen unattended. All right? So that process of privatization, which was interrupted in 2007, and we've forgotten that now. It had implications. Continued in 2013 and has now produced outcomes which many of us think are suboptimal via a process that many of us think was corrupt or wrong, but it has produced an outcome. And I hope again that outcome will be discussed. But the final thing I'd like to touch on is about reform. Reform and political will. Reform does not happen unless the government of the day has an interest in making it happen, or rather making it start, because I don't know of a reform process that ends with one single administration. And then the subsequent administrations must have an interest in continuing that reform. Of course, reviewing how it has played out, making sure that adjustments are made, but really continuing along the road to that destination, which needs to be clearly identified to the populace so that you get the buy-in. Whether that happened again in Nigeria, the way it should have happened is an open question. I have my views. I don't think that reform started, even the way it started was a bit of a question mark. But at least it started and it went along down the road. So I hope that our discussion will touch on these. These are some of the things which I think are critical in trying to work out where we are coming from, where we are today, whether we're on the right path, and if we're not, how we adjust, reset, as you've used that phrase, and then go down to that El Dorado. But I think that finally, I believe that the basic precepts, which is having the private sector come into the electricity sector and try and make a market out of it, is the right thing to do. Whether we're doing it right, still an open question.
So there were challenges with the process, but we can all agree that going through with that process and privatizing was still the right thing to do, and that the challenge we face today is how to make that outcome more efficient or
Perhaps
better, right?
Probably a good summary of the situation.
Excellent. Okay, let me turn to Frank Edozie, Engineer Frank Edozie. If you can, in 5 short minutes, make your opening remarks, and then we get into the discussion.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me try, after 2 lawyers, as an ordinary engineer, let me try and put some sense into it. I'll start off from where Ayo stopped. The power reform process that we have been on, is it the right thing? I would say yes. Because you think of the alternative, it will get you nowhere. Therefore, what we're trying to do is the right thing. So, why is it the right thing? Let's look at a few indices. There was a law that was passed in 2005, the Electric Power Sector Reform Act in 2005. That makes it 15 years this year. Mm-hmm. That law is still intact. That law still governs all aspects of what we're trying to do today in the power sector. And given that it has survived a number of regimes, we can say that is one success. I'll take another index. At the time privatization finally happened in 2013, those of you here that can remember, you probably know that the power sector was nearly comatose. Generation capacity installed and available was probably 4.95 gigawatts. I don't think anybody had a number to what transmission was. Depends on whatever TCN told you on the day. There were no distribution companies as we know them today, but power failures, significant power failures, were the feature of the day. That was the environment into which individuals bought into 11 distribution companies and the 7 generation companies. So what has happened? With the generation companies, over the last, 10 years, whatever it is now, capacity has been added such that available capacity today for thermal and hydro generation is very nearly 13 gigawatts from 5. Is that progress? I think it is. The challenge is it enough progress given the hunger that there is in the land? Then I would say no. Which is then where we have to address our minds. How do we get this thing to happen at the pace that it meets the hunger that is in the land? So the generation subsector did respond. These were private individuals with private money and a little government shareholding that had enough belief in the system to put their money into it to grow the capacity. At the time they bought into the Gencos, the investors were listening to the song of increased generation capacity. That is where the problem is, based on the understanding. Now we know that the problem was more than generation. We've increased the available capacity, but we can't bring it through to you and I as consumers. We look at the transmission subsector. According to TCN, we have roughly 8 gigawatts of willing capacity today. Now, nobody has tested it, so we don't know that it really exists, but that's what they can boldly say is there. Some gap between 13 and 8, but they have grown from where they were. And we do have pockets of excellence across the country where availability of electricity has increased. So has there been progress? Yes, there has. But the same thing, not enough. And I'm sorry, Jumoke is here from distribution. But when you look at these 3 subsectors and you look at the one that seems to be facing the biggest challenge, it is distribution. It is because of the inability of the distribution subsector to distribute what they can get that we are constrained at 3.5 to 4 gigawatts of power, down from the 8 that transmission company says they can give us, further down from the 13 that the generation companies have provided.
Okay.
And if you live in certain neighborhoods, you can say that some things got better. Now, if you live further away from the cities, there are people that say some things got worse. There are villages that have been in total darkness for many years, and the discos don't even care. But if you think again that people with private money went into this business, some of them actually without visiting data rooms. Anybody here who has been part of an acquisition, you don't acquire anything without going to a data room. You don't buy a black box. But some of these guys invested in black box. They had no idea, not how many staff PHCN had, not how many transformers they had, not how many customers they had, but they had enough belief.
They bought a dream.
Probably, bought a dream.
All right.
Yeah?
So,
I'll just give me a few minutes. Have I been more than 5 minutes?
and pushing up against.
I surprised myself. Yeah. So, overall, you can say that some progress has been made. Mark you, when the privatization happened, it was acknowledged worldwide as one of the boldest that had ever taken place. where almost the whole sector, almost all parts of the value chain were privatized. The only one that was kept was the one in the middle. So that was bold. And we have managed to stay on course, albeit slower than expected. The people that designed, I think Elio was in the group, they envisaged getting to the market in 4 stages. What they didn't say was how long it was going to take.
In each stage.
We are currently in one of the stages. We're taking forever in that stage, but we haven't lost track. So the challenge we have is finding where the levers are that we can act on to redirect what we're doing and increase the pace of delivery.
Excellent.
I'd like to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. So I'll come to you, Jumoke, to talk a little bit about the distribution space and the challenges in there, because as Frank said, it appears to be where some of the challenges lie today. But before we do that, I'd like to go to Eyo. Not only because you were in Garden of Eden when this whole creation was happening, but you were a key voice in that process and then later became a regulator. What were some of the assumptions that made us believe at the time that by this time in Nigeria we'll be hitting up around 40, 50,000 megawatts? And what has happened? Yeah, in some of the reports, they said 40,000, 20,000?
20 more.
You like 20?
I had 20.
Okay, so let's work with 20. So we're expecting that by now we'll be hitting up 20,000. Today we've got generation capacity at about 13,000. TCN claims it has transmission capacity of 8,000, but just about 3,500, 4,000 gets to all of us. Why weren't we able to hit that 20,000? What were some of the assumptions we made that made us believe we could hit the 20,000, and why hasn't that happened?
Okay. Well, I'm glad you didn't say that when I was in the Garden of Eden, I ate the forbidden fruit. Assumptions. You always have to make assumptions with reform. And one of the most important was that you would have the right kind of people.
Who bought the companies.
Right.
Yeah.
Who would then play a key part in creating this market that we're talking about. In hindsight, I think the target of 20,000 was actually an understated one. We could have done a lot, much more if we had continued in a certain trajectory. So let me disclose my interest in this. I am definitely not an impartial observer. I'm definitely biased. It's the bias of someone who was there even before creation started, so to speak, in the BPE. Many people don't know that there have actually been 2 power sector reform bills. The first one was passed in 2003, and that was actually my first task in BP, go and get this law passed, and I did. It was passed. We took it to OBJ in May 2003, and he refused to sign. He refused to give assent to it for purely political reasons. So I talked about reform and political will and having to go through. The basic assumption by those of us who were part of the technocratic group was that you would always have that political will that would go one step after the other. So first, you had a bill that was passed in 2003 with the president that gave the marching order, go, and it was an executive bill. It wasn't a House of Assembly members, a National Assembly members bill. Go and get this thing done. We did it, brought it back to him, please sign, sir. He said, no, I won't sign. It had to go through another iterative process because if you remember, May 2003 was the end of one legislative session, and therefore, in accordance with parliamentary rules, a bill that is not signed, assented to by the time the next government starts, you start afresh. So it wasn't until 2005. By 2005, and please forgive me if I'm going into some history and some war stories here, but we need to be reminded about these things sometimes. By 2005, when the law was passed, what was happening? We were doing third-term agenda, so there was a loss of focus, right? number one. Number two, the Niger Delta Power Holding Company then came in. So you had a government that had just passed a law saying we want to privatize, but that government was also setting up yet another power company. So there was a little bit of a, shall I call it a mismatch in policy objectives here. And then 2007, when OBJ left, President Yar'Adua came in, and by September 2007, a categorical decision had been taken by him, in October, I'm sorry, not to continue with the reform process. So it stopped, dead stop. By then, BPE had actually done the first roadshow going around to the world and calling in people. I went on the roadshow myself in 2002, spoke with RWE, Aon, investors all over the place, and they were all waiting to jump in. Because the basics that they wanted to see, which was a change in the legal and regulatory framework, was actually happening. So 2006, after this second round of roadshows had happened, you had people waiting to come in, nothing. Dead stop. So of course, these Nigerians are not serious. And they went away. And for 3 years, even though you had a regulator in place, it was effectively a state of anomy, so to speak. A regulator that was supposed to... Now, let me mention something, which again, we need to understand the implications of. You would expect that the key responsibility of NERC is electricity regulation, isn't it? It's not. NERC's first primary responsibility is market design. When you look at the act that sets up NERC, NERC's the first two objectives address the question of market design. And what that speaks to is the fact that we didn't yet have a market in which you could have a regulator. Regulators regulate markets. They don't regulate sectors, right? Which is why you had effectively a NERC that was doing basically back office work, drafting regulations and all that, preparing for that day when we would have a market. Do we still have a market? I'm sure if the Vox Pop in here will tell us whether we have a market or not. But again, we have our views on that. So you didn't have a market, but you had a regulator that was trying its best to prepare to have a market. And then comes this time, 2011, when you had President Goodluck come in, set up the PTFP, where Frank, myself, and a number of others, some of whom are here in this audience, were working. And the three key tasks of PTFP in those days was, if I remember correctly, get the sector reform process restarted, bring back generation to some kind of even keel, right? And then I can't remember the third one.
That was because the NERC was suspended at the time.
NERC was in abeyance, effectively. Yeah. So they had taken out the commissioners, all seven of them had gone, removed effectively illegally. I'm sorry to say this, but that's the truth. So a new set of people had to come in, and I was one of those who was tapped to go to NERC. So I went to NERC, and the key function then became, as I said, how do we then create this market? And that's when you started having this number of steps that were taken. You had, with the benefit of hindsight, a number of key steps were taken. Get the country to understand that tariffs needed to move up, right, to a point where they could be, quote, cost reflective of the cost of doing business, so that you could then have a commercial basis, a financial basis for having private money come into the sector. But digress a little bit. You have the generation sector and the distribution sector at opposite ends, and in the middle, you've got transmission that is still government-owned. You also have in Nigeria the peculiarity that probably about 80-90% of our power generation is gas-fired. But you don't, as a regulator, unlike in other countries, regulate the gas market. So you had also not just a policy mismatch, but also a regulatory mismatch. And gas was regulated by an entity that was regulator. DPR, supply regulator, is a part of the Ministry of Petroleum Resources, which itself sees itself as the chairman of the board of the NNPC. And so you have this situation where decisions about gas, even though gas consumption in the power sector is probably about 50, 60, 70%. I'm just throwing figures about rates, about 70% of what the gas market is all about. You don't have concerns for what is happening in the electricity sector. So you had a regulatory mismatch, all right? Let's bear that in mind. Now, you then come to privatization, 2013. We played a key role in that, but we also saw, when I say we, I'm talking about NERC, and I think we made that clear to our political masters, that, look, by the time you are privatizing, the people that we see are not really, they don't have, and I'm trying to be as diplomatic as I can. It's not something I'm used to doing.
They don't have the technical and the financial.
No, they're not the right kind of people that you would want in a market like this at this point in time as your core investors and managers.
But they were the only ones who responded when you called.
So I'm coming to that. Like I said, privatization is 99% politics and 1% economics. So you had to take a decision. And I'm glad I wasn't the one that took that decision. But you had to take a decision. Do we stop and look for this ideal buyer, or go ahead and hope that we can have people kickstart a privatization process, which will then generate other waves of privatization? And that is a purely political, economic decision, but it's driven by politics, first of all. So you had people saying, we have elections coming in 2015. If we don't take this decision in 2013, 2014, there will be a lot of politicking. There won't be any time for all this technocratic stuff. So let's do it now. And they went ahead, even though NERC had in writing advised that maybe you want better quality people. But we went ahead. I think, personally, it was the right decision to take, right? All told. Did it produce right outcomes? I think it did. By 2015, we had got ourselves to a point where we're able to start, Frank, the second stage, right? The transition stage electricity market. And that took us 4 years to get into, of preparation and hard work, of getting procedures, systems, personnel trained in place and all that. And that started. And you know the thing about electricity, ladies and gentlemen, can any one of you tell me what you had for breakfast last week, Monday? No, that's not breakfast.
That's a coffee addict.
That's a coffee addict. That's your breakfast. But no, then you're not Nigerian. I'm talking about pounded yam or rice or cornflakes and beans or something. Most of us don't remember what we had for breakfast, lunch, or dinner just a week ago. Why am I saying this? In 2014 to 2015, Nigeria had a nice run of, this power supply adequacy from about October, November, all through Christmas. And then in January, the tariffs went up with minimal complaints from Nigerians. Why? Most of us didn't need to resort to our alternative power backup. Most of us, if not even all of us. I remember then that one of the discussions that was raging at the time was, do we even need to sell our generators? Now, we're that optimistic about what was coming. Tariffs went up in January. In February, we started the term market. And then in March, we reduced tariffs. Now, that created, for whatever reasons, that created distrust, a credibility crisis, which I think points to the real challenge that we have in the sector today. It created a credibility crisis between the regulated, who had believed that they were going to get not more profits.
More power.
No, the regulated, who are responsible for putting electricity into the market, right? They thought, and you had the financial services sector finally beginning to look into the market. That was when the CBN thing was done. Now, Patrick, you said bailout. It wasn't a bailout. It was actually a financing arrangement with the CBN. CBN lent money to the market on certain conditions, which had to be fulfilled before it could access that money. And they were being accessed in January, February, when we had the tariff reduction, and therefore CBN pulled back. Now, for those that were able to get that loan at that time, they're still paying back till today, on time, on schedule, as a first charge. Right? So no issues. It was the bailout, and it's not part of this 1.6 trillion whenever you talk about it. That changed the dynamic in the market and created a crisis in governance, which we are still suffering from today. Because we forget, these same discos who are now doing 28-30% on average remittances for power that they buy, we're doing 74, 75, 80% under the same ownership, under the same management as they have today. What changed? What changed was not that. You said what? See finish. You're right, actually. In the manner of speaking, he's right. That's typical Nigerian way. It explains everything. 2 words.
See finish.
That explains everything. See finish. Right? But what is the content of see finish? Discos who were being managed, being regulated, and behaving in the right way, suddenly decided, well, we don't have a regulator anymore. It's all for ourselves. So Disco's first incentive now is to themselves and their 60% shareholder, not even the other 40%, which is the federal government of Nigeria. Gencos have no choice. As a patriotic duty, they must continue to generate, even though they know that they're not going to get, so they don't even behave like people in the market. Because if you're in the market and you're not getting money for your energy, what do? You shut down, right? TCN is government owned, so they will always get money and build transmission. Now, between 2016 and now, particularly in 2015 to 2016, that 214 billion, big hole on the balance sheet of the electricity sector ballooned into something else. And we have not been able to bring it down ever since. So what am I going to terminate at? What we have in Nigeria today is not a crisis of tariffs, like many of us think. It's not a crisis of engineering, build this, build that, build the other. It's a crisis of governance, right? And there are two key sets of players where this governance issue affects the most, and it has implications for us. And therefore, in order to work out a solution, we need to dimension that governance challenge properly. And it is this. You have today a regulator that is no longer interested in market design or even standing up a market. And I say this with all due respect, right? I hate to have to be so hard on the regulator, but in terms of behavior, between 2016 and now, we haven't had the optimal kind of behavior that we would want from our regulator. But also, let's look at the regulated, the discos. For better, for worse, they no longer see themselves as part of a market in which there are parties and players and participants that are mutually interested in each other's survival. It's us for ourselves first. So until we deal with that challenge of governance, I'm afraid we will have to continue to walk in the wilderness until we get to the promised land.
Thank you for that university level discussion of the power sector. We really is university level.
There was no jargon whatsoever. Nobody was playing. In fact, my friend there said see finish. I just simply broke down see finish for him.
Excellent. Thank you so much, but we really appreciate it. A round of applause for Ayo. Okay, so Frank raised distribution. Ayo also talked about distribution. Can you share with us what's happening in that space and the challenges, that the distribution companies are also facing, trying to work in this market?
Okay, thank you. I think I agree with a lot of the things that Barrister Ayo mentioned. And it's so easy to blame the discos. But when I see somebody who just blames the discos, it's clear to me that you don't really understand the sector very well. Because the disco is at the point of collection. They are the ones that the customers see. They're the ones that relate with the customers. So it's easy, if there's any problem whatsoever, to blame the discos. One of the issues that has been mentioned is the issue of governance.
For me? Oh, okay.
One of the issues that has been mentioned is the issue of governance, but even the issue of governance inextricably leads to the issue of tariff. Now, the discos have been maligned for always talking about tariffs, but we have the responsibility to collect what is required to ensure the financial viability of the sector. Now, if you do not have that, if you have a tariff that is designed in a way that some costs are passed through from the generation level all the way to embed, embed passes those invoices to you, but your own tariff has been pegged, has been frozen in a way that is totally out of course with what the prevailing market indices are saying, then what exactly are you supposed to do? Everybody in this value chain has their own responsibility. And I think it's important that, it's clear. Gencos have the areas they've not fulfilled their responsibilities. Transmission has its own problems, about even sending energy to areas where you can't recover the funds. So those issues have been there. And then the discos, could we have done better? Absolutely. But one of the things I've said is that in a value chain, if the value chain is to be made whole, then everybody must work together seamlessly. Now, pointing accusing fingers here and there does not make it easy for the parties to work together. We need to put our differences aside and decide how to overcome the challenges that we're facing. So, back to this issue of tariff. Why is tariff so important to a distribution company? Because out of how much the distribution company collects, about 25% of that is what you are supposed to keep, while 75% of it goes up the value chain. Out of that 25%, you are supposed to do network improvements, you are supposed to pay your salaries, you are supposed to have a return on investment. And I'm going to say something something that we face every day. If you don't have sufficient funds to do the network improvements, the willingness to pay just nosedives. So you must ensure that you are still able to fund your operations to generate, to distribute enough electricity that make the customers even want to pay. Now, what has happened? In 2019, there was a minor review order that was issued in August that took effect in July. Now, that minor review order addressed minor reviews from 2016 to 2018 for 3 years. So what is happening is the minor review mechanism was put in place in order to address, because at if you look at the value chain, you have the suppliers of fuel, then you have the generating companies, then you have TCN, you have MBET, you have the discos. Now, when the minor review or minor reviews are not done, that means you are sitting with a tariff that is below the market realities. What then happens to your balance sheet? For every invoice that you fail to pay in full, MBET adds it, keeps on accumulating it. And then there is what you call a penalty interest for the amount that is unpaid. That you must recognize it in your balance sheet. Now, this is the same balance sheet that a disco is expected to take to a bank.
Okay.
If you are a banker and a distribution company comes to you and says, I want to invest in my network. Good. Distribution business is generally a viable, type of business. And then they look at, how am I going to get my money back? And they look at the fact that your tariffs are suppressed, your costs are way above, the tariff. Who is going to lend you money?
Okay, so let's explore that a little bit. Because earlier mentioned that, back in the day, a few years ago, the discos were returning about 78, 80, 85, in some cases 90%, right? But today, some discos return zero, some do about 20%. What changed? Yeah, and more importantly, the same balance sheet challenges that the discos have is the same balance sheet challenges the gencos and the gas companies have. And if monies do not flow back up the chain, the entire value chain suffers.
Yeah.
How do you respond to some of this?
Well, for me, I believe that if the tariff issue is properly addressed, then you can hold the discos responsible and say that this is how much, this is your tariff, it's a cost-reflective tariff, and this is what you are supposed to be remitting to the market. Now, you were talking about the fact that what happened. Now, with the passage of time, there was an accumulation. It wasn't just, at the beginning, DISCO started with a zero debt on their balance sheets, but with the passage of time and the fact that these tariffs, the minor reviews, were not implemented, then the shortfall kept on being added up. So initially, that was not the case. In fact, a lot of the discos that I know, and certainly our disco, we had vendor financing was the way that we were able, to raise funding. But if you want to do a corporate loan, by the time they look at your balance sheets, they don't want to, it becomes difficult for them to lend you money. And then even if you want to bring in, there are two, you can either be debt or it can be equity. So, and even an equity investor that wants, equity also has a price. So for somebody to put his equity in your company, there must be a return in the near future and not in the buy and buy. Now, for me, one of the things that I consider a positive is the fact that last year, in August, there was a minor review done for 2016 to 2018, which covered 6 periods for which no review had been done. Now, is it perfect? No, it's not perfect, but it has certainly had a significant impact, even on the balance sheet of the discos, in terms of reducing that liability that that we had, in terms of debts.
Okay, Frank, today you're running a program that is expected to, solve all these problems, right?
Yeah.
So you're like Voltron, yeah? Can you lay out for us a roadmap of some sort on how we can solve this myriad of challenges we face in the sector, and get Nigerians to a point where at least we can get the 20,000 megawatts that was promised 10 years ago, I guess? Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to do that, but only try. But if you don't, there's something you say, if you don't know where rain started to beat you, then yeah, there's something like that. There are some truths that we have got to accept for what they are. See, the period from the end of 2016 for almost 2 years, there was no regulator. And therefore, the market, whatever it was every man to himself. So if you were sitting in the disco space, not collecting enough money, with the loans there, the natural thing to do, I would have done that were I sitting in a disco space. I would first look after myself if nobody was asking me the question. And I would think that a few discos did that, maybe not all. And I'm not against Jumoke at all, or
Abuja.
or Abuja disco. Yeah. But it was a natural thing to do.
Actually, so, Abuja is one of the discos that pay the highest. Yeah.
But why did what happened happen? What happened at the time? Why did it happen? It was, I'm going to be a little less political than Ayo. It was government meddling. That's all it was. The decision to claw back on tariffs was destructive, and it was simply a political decision that literally has destroyed the market, and we haven't recovered. But I think it's a duty that everybody owes the industry and owes themselves to tell the truth about the cost of electricity. I believe that anybody, any Nigerian who has even I better pass my neighbor generator, knows what it costs to light one bulb for 1 hour. And if everybody knows that, I believe everybody knows that a tariff of 27 naira per kilowatt hour
It's much lower.
is nothing compared to what you should be paying. And we have examples. Many of us live in estates or close to estates where there is near 24/7 supply. And the first economic decision people in those estates make is they get rid of their generators. But what do they pay? It is about 60 naira, 65, even 70 naira per kilowatt hour. But people commit to paying those tariffs with the promise that they are going to be able to get rid of their generators. So when you have union leaders and politicians basically deceiving us that high tariff is the problem, they are leading us down the wrong path. And people should be speaking up to address what the problem is.
Okay, so tariff is one.
So tariff is one. Now, second one, we look at the numbers that I gave earlier. Against the backdrop of 13 gigawatts generation capacity available today, 8 gigawatts transmission capacity, and about 4.5 being the most the DISCOs can do, the first opportunity you attack is the DISCO front. If you've solved the tariff problem, so begin to redress the issue, then the kind of problems the DISCOs have about attracting funds, you'll get more confidence back in the system. They can attract funds and build out or improve their networks such that we can grow the capacity, right? I don't believe, I've spent a lot of time in the gas sector, I don't believe that having the same or not having the same regulator for the electric sector and gas is a problem. What is a problem is, again, the fallacy of price. Gas is an international commodity sold internationally. You cannot have a producer who has invested in producing gas sell to you at $1.50 when they can sell the same gas at $2.50 on the market. It's simple economics. And if you're demanding that, there has to be a way of paying it.
Excellent.
I think we managed to address that problem in the past. So the price of gas is not the big problem there is at the moment. What the problem is that the electricity subsector is not paying for gas that they consume. But if we increase tariffs and increase the liquidity of the electricity sector, they're better able to pay for gas. And therefore, we have a chance of increasing our utility of the current 13 gigawatts that is available up from the 2 point something that we're doing at the moment, at least to match the 8 that TCN says they can transmit. How long is it going to take us to do this? If we are focused, probably 18 to 24 months. And then we are not talking about 4.5 gigawatts distributed, but probably 8. And then other things will be happening. There's a lot that's happening in the renewable space.
Absolutely.
But we're not addressing that. But we can take advantage of all those. So the picture that I see is not a hopeless one, but it is one that is based on truth, understanding the truth for what it is, and taking the bold steps that we need. Again, one of the key things is get government and the politicians out of the business of running the electricity sector.
Excellent. We'll open it up for audience participation in a minute. I just want to come to Eyo again to see if there's anything Frank left out that you would want to advocate for, especially when it comes to the governance.
So it is not about whether or not we can pay. We can pay. After all, we use our generators, and a generator is probably about 150, 200 naira per kilowatt hour if we use diesel. So that's not the challenge. The challenge is just simply being able to put in place the rules for a market that says, if I put in energy, I will get money and make sure those rules happen. And that is what a regulator does. So for me, I'm not saying this because I was a NERC, right? The way our market is structured today, and given the fact that you have a law that says there shall be a market designed in a particular way as determined by a regulator, what that regulator is, whether it's on top of its game, it's got the right kind of people with the right kind of sentiment, people who can actually look at government and say this is what we need to do and do it, and not listen to skewed political antenna that are driven by the wrong kind of incentives. Unless you have that, right? I can't say it enough because I keep hearing what some people in NEC say, and I almost want to scream, right? Because these are the wrong things that they're talking about. Telling me that some politician somewhere is saying that, oh no, don't increase tariffs. Who says you shouldn't increase tariffs? We already pay more. Look, Nigeria has probably about 70, 80,000 megawatts of electricity, of generation capacity. And it works, probably about 56 of it works every day. The public power supply is 4,000. The rest is you, me, Cadbury, and everybody else. 56, 60,000, right? On a daily basis, and this is numbers, on a daily basis in Lagos, and that has been studied, the Lagos market spends about $800 to $900 million naira a day on diesel. If you flip that source of power supply from alternative power backup to public power supply, it will be paying probably 30-40% of that figure. So we are not investing in Lagos alone something like 500-600 million in our children, in savings, in investments, into real estate, in developing our communities.
Because we're putting it in diesel.
We're literally
burning it up.
Burning it.
Yeah.
Right?
Frank, come in, and then I want to go to the audience.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, because I said I would, and I'll just make the point. I said between end of 2016 and sometime in 2018, there was no regulator. And we cannot underestimate the damage that was done to the market because of the political decision that was made at the time not to have any commissioners.
No, we have commissioners.
The market decayed. Today we have commissioners. Jumoke talked about the minor review that has happened, that covered 6 periods. It's a regulator that did that. We have a proposal for tariff increase.
Yeah.
Yeah. On a topic that is on at the moment, it's a regulator that did that, right? So there are steps that are being taken. Is it everything that should be done? No. Yeah, but there are steps that are being taken. We should be aiming to point out those things and build on them.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's go to the audience.
Please, I am Comrade Prince Willow Korea of Association for Public Policy Analysis. I'll start this way. Nigeria today, politicians will rig election, and arguments will come here and there, the person begins to rule. Even the child of a rich man can prostitute or become an armed robber because there is no discipline. I don't think the issue of tariff is the issue in this value chain. What is the consumer protection component of the act? What is being done about it? What happens is if you pass exams through Expo, you have no shame anymore if your performance is 0. That is why you can see discos happily justify inefficiency and fraud. Take for instance, in Abuja here, we have intervened for people. We need to be careful what we do with electricity. If you watch today, people will die as they are being buried. Their children are laughing and rejoicing. In the past, they will be crying. Conscience has been taken away. Morality has been destroyed. The number of small business operators that the Abuja disco has rendered useless are so many. Nobody thinks about those of them in Nyanya. Nobody thinks about those of them in Kubwa. Nobody thinks about those of them in Babalada and what they pass through. This right is not given to them. And they are compelled to be paying money. Nobody is even talking about the performance agreements that discos entered at the beginning. What extent have they obeyed any of them? Did they obey any? Did they buy transformer or pole?
That again comes back to the regulator.
The issue here is the commitment of discos to obey the regulatory policies, which demands that consumers need to be well informed and organized to engage them and confront them. So that because if they serve you, you pay. If they don't serve you, what are you paying for? But where they have the effrontery to be collecting money without serving people, and they have the effrontery to abandon their service for years and go to government to borrow money for them, how do you expect them to be efficient?
Okay.
So what they are enjoying is lack of discipline, and then government willingness to borrow and give them, and then they enjoy excuses of tariff. In the East, people pay for their transformer, their pole, their wire, everything. Still, they pay bills. They are not complaining if the light is given to them. So tariff is not the issue. It's irresponsibility and hatred for citizens of this country.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask about one thing that I don't think's been touched on is whether any or all of you think that breaking up the grid to some degree and regionalising is likely to have a positive impact at this stage, or is it going to be another disruption? And to be specific, would it stimulate finally getting
One
more,
house, please.
Would it stimulate
One house, please.
finally getting more solar generation out of the north of Nigeria, given that one of the other missing things from the last 10 years is a decade of talking about solar, but nothing really happening?
Thank you very much. My name is Latif Akoni. I am a research associate in CC, Center for the Study of Economics of Africa. I have a question related to the disco, but at least since Madam Jumoke is here, we understand that he mentioned something while he was presenting. Government inefficiencies in other sectors. I don't have good roads. I don't have education. I provide my security. I provide my water. And now electricity that I'm enjoying. You told me some few years ago that you have privatized it, you sold it to your friends, and you want me to be paying for the service when I'm not enjoying others. So consumers are not involved. Consumers are not educated. And we know it is supposed to be the job of, well, if you look at the value chain, discos interface with the customers. But because of the role of the government, which NEC is supposed to play, they should also carry everybody along. A lot of people put in sentiment. So what I will ask is this. How are the discos or AEDC in terms of consumer education? A number of things happen. Okay, for example, let me just use one example. I understand that if I have a meter, a prepaid meter, and I'm under your network as AEDC, I should be able to migrate within your network and use the same meter because I'm your customer and you are providing the service. But we get complaints by your people that begin to give all kind of excuses. You'll be amazed that even informed, educated people don't understand that this is such a simple mathematics. I can put any SIM card on my phone. That's just the same thing as this thing. But yet, we keep hearing a lot of issues where people feel they cannot migrate. People don't even understand the way the map thing works, meter access providers. These are issues, and I believe it is not for the government to come and provide. If people in the center, we say Gaki don't know, how do you expect somebody in Suleja, Kuchingoro, and all that, all these rural places to know?
Sure.
So how are you engaging the consumers?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My name is Harrison. I'm a media person. My question goes to Mr. Ayo. You spoke so much about resetting the market by the regulator.
I didn't mention the word. I don't like the word.
Resetting the electricity market. If I may get you right from your analysis. I'm just looking at if you could speak more to that on maybe the bold choices we need to make from the regulator end. There are things happening now gradually, but we may need to dare more. But if you could speak more to that, those bold choices, because we've seen the perennial problems we've been having over time, not really finding solution as it were very soon. Of course, this year we've already had the grid collapse. Last year it happened around maybe up to 13 times as it were. Could you speak to those both choices, please? So
Excellent.
that at least we would...
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ayo, I'll just go straight to the point. So you spoke about markets. So what kind of market do you hope to see? Say in the next 5-6 years, how do you hope the Nigerian electricity market to look like? Where is the place of competition in that market? And then looking at existing regulation, our current regulations and policies, do you think they lay a foundation for that kind of market you envisage to see?
Say that again. The last question.
Okay, so looking at existing regulations and framework today, do you think they lay a foundation for the type of market you hope to see in the future? For Jumoke, we've heard a lot about disco balance sheets, but nobody has seen your balance sheet. The government has thrown in a lot of intervention, a lot of funds. We don't have reports on how those monies are spent. Do you have any plans of going to the stock market? At least let that be your last resolve. Go to the stock market, float some bonds, and let's see if you can raise some money there. And then would you like the legislature to pass that bill to legalize and criminalize estimated bidding? What will be the implication of that on your business? And to Mr. Frank, I like what you said as regards to tariff. Elementary economics, revenue is equals to price times quantity. So there's a lot of factors, and tariff may just be one of the very minute. What other factors do we need to look at? In my own opinion, I would say staff the discos, leave the tariff where it is, don't give them any support, let them get hungry enough to start to think of a lot of innovation. I'm happy with the Abuja disco. After signing the IMAS deal with GVE as regards to wholesale market, you could get a lot of that. If more discos are staffed enough, no support, they'll think of these innovative ideas to provide quality electricity. So what do you think about staffing the discos?
My question is for Ms. Olajumoke Disco. I wanted to know what the terms of your vesting contract with NBED are and what recourse you have to exit that contract. If you're saying, and if the contract is in any way pegged to the MITRE, because if you're saying there's a MITRE methodology that is catering for generation, but is freezing discos and almost forcing you to operate at a loss, do you not have a recourse to exit that vesting contract and go out to the market and source your own power cheaper so you can basically make a profit on your tariff that is pegged?
Good evening. My name is John Kadiri.
Where? Where is it?
John Kadiri.
John.
I work for Shell.
Yeah.
We own a power plant and we also produce gas. Ayo, you know we've been part of this for some time.
I know.
And I can relate with all you have said and all my senior colleague, Frank, discussed. I wanted to make the point about moving one step forward and 3 steps backward. I also want to refer to the issue of having agreements and contracts that are not worth the paper they are written on. In which case, if you have no consistency and predictability of operating environment, contract entered into have no sanctity, investment will definitely be jeopardized. Something to watch and something to know as we look forward in the market, even as Frank has predicted, within the 18 to 24 months. And for my friend Jumoke, AEDC, we know you have balance sheets. We all have balance sheets. Whatever you are collecting, put it on the table so that it can be shared and go around all the participants in the value chain instead of one person monopolizing by virtue of being closer to the cash. Ayo, Commissioner Ayo, I used to call you and I still call you. I think we should give NEC a chance. Some new things are happening. New regulations rolled out. Let's police them, support them, and see how we can drive the market together to where we want the market to be. Beyond talking about governance, there is a structure in place. Let's police that structure to make it more effective. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, a lot of questions and comments. Jumoke, maybe we start with you, not because you got a lot of them.
Well, we're used to being very popular. Now, I think one of the first questions I recorded here was how does AEDC engage its customers? Now, we engage our customers on various platforms. The first one is we have customer care centers, contact centers, where customers who have issues can call us and those issues are recorded. In fact, we've diversified our contact center to the point where even using social media, we engage our customers through social media platforms, various social media platforms, Facebook, WhatsApp, even on our website. You can engage with us on any of those platforms. AEDC is committed to service delivery, which we know is our obligation as a DISCO. So we engage people on multiple platforms. We also do what you call actual stakeholder engagement, stakeholder meetings on safety, on education. For example, when the meter asset provider regulation came out, we also engaged with customers in various areas. In fact, I want to say that AEDC is the highest performing DISCO on the map. We have installed since the rollout over 70,000 meters. The next DISCO is a distant, second. So we are committed to engaging with our customers. We are not blind or deaf to the concerns that customers have about estimated billing. It is high on our priority, which is why under the map arrangement, we developed what is called a mobile map. And mobile map brings the map team, meter asset provider team, to your area. So what we did was a proof of concept and brought maps to particular areas, created awareness, and planned to close the metering gap in those areas. So we are committed to ensuring that our customers have meters. And I will link it to another question where somebody said, what if the tariff goes up and
they can't control
you can't control your consumption? We are also, I think that's one of the reasons why we've taken a very aggressive stance to roll out meters. The meter service charge has been approved by NERC, which allows for instrumental payments. Our maps have signed up to those meter service charges so that customers who cannot afford to pay the meter prices in full upfront can elect to pay over a period of time. So we are concerned about our customer satisfaction. Now, the other issue is how are money spent? How does AEDC spend its resources? That's one of the questions that somebody asked. Now, the thing is that we have a regulator, and one of the things that the regulator does is to come and review our books. There's something called an open book review. And when you have a regulator, your regulator cannot say, show me this information, and then you say no. No, you have to show them. So on the regulatory end, it's clear that they have access to our books. Periodically they come, and there is no area that is out of bounds for the regulator. The regulator can view everything. The other thing I want to say is that AEDC had signed up to the 213 billion naira fund. Now, under that fund, we had to come into a framework where all our collections come into a particular account, which even CBN has visibility of. And then there's a first line charge that goes to CBN. So they have visibility of the amount. Then on the third leg, AEDC is one of the DISCOs that is audited. Our audited accounts are up to date. Our audited accounts are filed with the Corporate Affairs Commission. So if you are interested, you can obtain a copy of the audited accounts there. And that shows how AEDC has spent its money, over the previous year. Now, somebody asked about supplying electricity when it is needed. I agree. I agree that as long as there is insufficient supply, we need to come to a mutual agreement of this is when I need this electricity. And this is something we are working, towards ensuring that we are able to come to an agreement with customers and even notify you. One of the things we've started doing is even to notify our customers if there's going to be an outage, that maintenance work is going on here, so you will be out of supply for a number of hours. That is one of the initiatives that we have implemented. Availability of meters. Now, the responsibility for metering still lies with the DISCOs, though we have appointed 3 meter asset provider companies. Now, these companies are the ones that are responsible for providing, meters. So right now, the obligation to buy meters has been passed to the MAPs. One of the challenges that is happening to the MAPs is the duty. There is an increase in the duty being paid from where it used to be 10% before, is now at 45%. So, which is one of the things that when you're talking about the things that can make an impact, the whole country, the government knows that metering is very important. So, imposing such a duty or tariff at this time is counterproductive to the policy of getting everybody metered and putting an end to estimated billing. I think
there's one on the migration within the network. So you've got your meter, you're still within the Abuja AEDC network, but you can't migrate with your meter.
Okay, what we typically do is under the map, you are not even, the regulation states that you are not supposed to move the meter. But when you, just hear me out, hear me out. So I was coming to what you do instead. Another meter will be provided for you. And the credits that you have, assuming, for example, you've paid 50% of the cost of that meter, the credit would also be migrated to that meter. So that is what happened. So you don't move the meter, but you get another meter, and your credit history on the payment of the meter is what is migrated, so that you are not charged.
Is it automatic? The migration, is it automatic?
Yes, it's part of the process. It's part of the process. It is part of the process.
Okay, there's another question on if NAS were to criminalize estimated billing, what would that do to the disco business? Do you support it? And what would that do to the disco business?
Well, the thing about criminalizing estimated billing is that Nigeria will be the first country to criminalize estimated billing, because estimated billing is done around the world. Now, I think the concern. Wait.
One house. Let her land, please.
So
one house, please. One house.
I think AEDC has shown its commitment to meter its customers with and as I say, if you compare the performance of AEDC, we are willing to meter all our customers. But some of the things are not within AEDC's control. For example, I just mentioned the duty and how this duty has impacted all the meter asset providers who are now supposed to provide meters. So it would not be beneficial both to the customer and to AEDC for estimated billing to be criminalized. Okay?
Okay. There's a question on will you go to the capital market to raise money?
I believe that that is definitely an option, because the funds that you get from the capital market are longer term, and then the rates are depending on what kind of rating is on you get on the financing, maybe a lower rate. So that is definitely an option that we are considering.
Okay, and I think the last question for you was terms of the vesting contract with MBET.
Okay. Now, there are obviously terms, termination clauses, but the way it's stated, AEDC is contracted to take 11.5% of the generation of what is constantly what is generated now. And even if you go into, there are provisions for embedded generation, but one of the things you mentioned is cheaper. I'm not sure how much cheaper, you get it, because what we have is a blended tariff. The average cost of energy is a blended tariff at this time. So, there are always things to look out for, options for improving your business. But at this point in time, we are not planning to exit the vesting contract. Yes.
Okay, so there are some questions for Frank. I think the first one, at least I assigned it to you, is some question on regionalization of the grid. Yeah, what does that mean? How would it work technically, and is that a feasible solution? And what are the downsides to it?
Okay, is regional grid a feasible solution?
Yeah.
Answer is yes. But we are where we are today in Nigeria because of our history. And there was a time in this country when a state was not allowed to generate its own electricity because it was seen as a security risk. That's a fact. I think we've emerged from that period, and we are slowly, my read of what's going on is that we're slowly migrating towards implementing regional grids. And also reality is forcing us that way. We are increasingly having mini grids, renewable energy mini grids that are being implemented across the country. Within 3 to 5 years, many of those grids would need to be connected one way or the other to the national grid. And that is some emergence of regionalization of the grid. There's also one other factor that is forcing the regionalization. People are beginning to look inland, away from the coastal areas, for availability of fuel sources for power generation, especially thermal. You may know that Nigeria has many inland basins that have large accumulations of gas. And people are now beginning to actively explore using these gas sources to generate power. When that is done, it also forces the agenda of regionalization of grids. So the way that I read it, regionalization of grids, which is a good thing for grid stability, is something that is inevitable for Nigeria.
What would be the argument against it?
Argument against it was that it put power, again, it's politics. In the past, it was seen as concentrating
electricity power.
Independence. No, independence because if you're a region, it means you can generate your own electricity. Therefore, you're independent of the center, and therefore you're that much more powerful, right? Okay. We reasoned that like that at some point, but I think we've moved on.
We've moved on from there.
Yes.
Yeah. We hope so. We hope we've moved from there. I think there's another one for Frank. What other factors should be in place? Should we stop the discos? Yeah, I like. Yeah. It's a nice slogan. Stop the discos.
Stop the discos. Yeah. And my simple and honest answer to that is that would be the wrong thing to do.
Okay.
So what we're looking at, so you and I as consumers, we don't really care about discos, about Gencos, about the transmission company. All we want is throw the switch and you have light. So all these tribal wars that you have being fought between discos and Gencos, and it doesn't really concern us. Unfortunately, some of those operators, the discos and transmission companies and Gencos, so much believe in the tribal wars that they are not seeing that serving you and I is their primary objective. There is therefore an attitudinal change that is required amongst all the operators in the value chain to recognize that they are in service of the consumer. It is collaboration that is required. You don't stop the discos so that the Genco gets money. It would be the wrong thing to do. All of them should have enough to eat so that they will do the work that is required for us to get the electricity that we need.
I guess his argument is really, if there is always Big Daddy to go back to crying cap in hand and he's going to bail you out, then it doesn't force innovation. Yeah? And if there are some things that will be put in place to show that you've got to survive somehow, I mean, not because Abuja Disco is here, they've gotten a bit innovative with some of the stuff they're doing with GVE and so on and so forth. And I think the question is, are there things that should be done to force more of these discos to get innovative to solve the problem. And he encapsulated it as start the discourse. But
Okay.
yeah.
So if you take that sense of it, I mean, we went beyond the 213 billion. We're now in trillions of subsidy, effectively, that government has provided, and rightfully so, because they are the ones that refused for tariffs to be at the right level.
Correct.
Okay, but that government has also realized that putting subsidy into the system is not sustainable. There isn't the money to do that, not in any economy, and definitely not in ours. So there will be no more subsidies put in. So with that, we've made one step. The next step that we need is increased and utter transparency in the business of the discos. Every kobo that is paid by a consumer into a disco should be open book. And
how can that be realized?
By systems. Computer systems are there. The first step has been made, which is to require cashless processing. Then it is to make sure that all the platforms that collect money are transparently available to everybody in the value chain. So if there's any disco that is in any way predisposed to sharp practices, that gets cut out. And then also the regulator is independently able to verify what is going on in each and every disco. With that transparency, then the joined up nature of the business between the gas supplier, the generator, the transmission company, and the distributor, that will become more the case.
Do you agree?
Well, I wanted to say that one of the ways that the regulator has tried to enforce discipline is to insist on the minimum remittance. That is something that just came into play middle of last year, where the regulator has issued an order saying that these minimum amounts must be paid to the market.
So that's good, but that's, in my view, suboptimal to what Frank is recommending, which is an open and transparent system where every single naira that goes through the system is, visible to everybody. So we know how much you're collecting, we know how much you're remitting, and we're sure that, everybody is made whole in some proportion, if not, in entirety.
Well,
Frank.
I actually do go a lot further than that, right? And discos they wouldn't like it, right? What you have effectively today, you have monopolies by the distribution companies. They hold on to large geographies, and apart from the eligible customer regulation, no other person can do business there. I see a future, and it isn't rocket science. It applies in other economies where you will have competition in the business of providing electricity to consumers. So it won't be one disco that is able to sell to you. You, the consumer, can make the choice between supplier A and supplier B based on economics, right? Are we there yet? No. It's when the market gets there, but that is definitely where we should be going. What we need today is transparency of transactions. That will give confidence to the generation company in signing their contract to the gas company. That will give confidence to TCN to build out networks, knowing that the money flow will come. Right.
Excellent. Hey, you can comment on any of the questions they've answered, but you also got some ones with your name on it.
Okay. All right. So let me start with the last that Frank said, competition. I think it's a much hackneyed word, and we actually look at it from the wrong point of view. Let me tell us something. Between 2016 and today, the only new power we have in Nigeria is Azura. Right?
In Edo.
Azura Edo. How many megawatts? 450. Between 2016 and now, Nigeria's generator sellers have sold 25,000 megawatts. And the discos, the gencos are not competing. They are being beaten left, right, and center by the gencos, by the generator sellers. The smallest generator of the big players, apart from the guys who sell past my neighbor in the market, I think it's JMG. JMG sold 900 megawatts in the same period, and that's 5% of the market. I mean, that's about 3-4% of the market, right? So we're getting the competition picture totally wrong, and we're looking at the wrong things here. You won't have competition in the real sense of the word until you have generational adequacy, and we probably will not see that until most of us are here today who in our 50s, probably in our 60s, or maybe even 70s at the earliest, or maybe even dead, for all I know. So it's not about competition, it's just about just growing the market in any way you can, right? You will have innovation, particularly in the off-grid and the renewable energy space, right? And the discos are already having their lunch eaten by those small, nimble players who are delivering energy to estates, to closed communities, to commercial buyers, high-rise builders, and that kind of thing. So the disco market is actually dissipating real quick. The genco market is going even faster because the generator sellers have always beaten them hands down. There's just no competition there. That's one. The question about embed got me thinking about another question that we really haven't even realized. Again, do we actually need an embed in the true sense of the word? We don't. Embed is a single buyer. Single buyers always fail because they must be backed by government guarantees, right? The ideal is that a genco identifies its customer, wants to serve that customer, contracts for power, and procures in the most efficient way it possibly can, regulated by a process that the regulator has set up, right? And then signs a PPA and goes to someone, a bank usually, that receives that money on his behalf, collects its revenues on his behalf, and issues a guarantee, and the power plant is built. Now, when you do that, you then call TCN and say, look, I need a connection there, and the connection is built. Pure market, and that's the way markets are supposed to work. We needed an embed to be able to tide us through that period when discos are ramping up, changing their nature, changing their character, becoming players in a market. And that period when we would have to continue to have some kind of supply of new capacity. But in the how many years since embed was established, they've signed only one PPA that has actually been executed, and that's Azura. So if you're not signing PPAs, right, but you are, as I hear it from the market, stopping certain things from happening, do we really need an embed as it is presently constituted today, or we need to change its shape? Which is why I keep talking about the governance issues, right? Because until you deal with that policy question, you really will continue to have this ambiguity, right, and this disconnect in the market. So that's another point. Regionalize the grid. I think, again, we're putting the cart before the horse. The grid is a service provider, right? You don't regionalize the grid first. And maybe that was the question that was asked. But really, what you want to regionalize are generation and distribution. And if you have that, right, then, of course, you will naturally have regional transmission to follow it, because that's what the real players in the market, gencos, discos, buyers and sellers, demand. So if I have 4-5 gencos in a particular part of the country who are not obliged to send power to the opposite part of the country, but to focus on their markets there, then of course you have regional players, right? And so you have regional grid. You also then drive the creativity and innovation of having to solve the power problem in another part of the country. So today, in the eastern part of the country, east of the Niger, you've got a total surfeit of gas. It doesn't make sense to do anything else but thermal generation, right? In the north, every single state in the north has a hydro source.
Okay.
Every single one has a hydro source. In fact, has multiple hydro sources.
So
you've got the room to play
hydros.
for small hydros and wind and solar, right? And you can play there and deliver just like those 5 villages I was talking about have demonstrated very, very clearly. So regional grids will happen, or they should happen, if you allow real economics to play out here. So that's so much. John Kadiri, my good friend, we share a common history together. I talked about that period of time when Nigeria had a lot of power, right? It was people like John that made it happen, right? Because the gas suppliers, which is what Shell also is, apart from being a player, agreed that, look, we're going to put gas into the grid so that generation can come, and then Nigerians would have electricity and would be able to play a trick on them, trick in quotes, which is give them more power, but also at some point in time up the tariffs with minimal complaints. And that's what happened, right? But it happened because they could see that there was actually money coming in that 214 billion thing that was going to happen. And if that had happened, I would like to believe that if we had actually let that transaction happen without that interruption that the tariff reduction created and the uncertainty that it created, Nigeria would be a totally different country today. Totally different. Because what would have happened would have been that buying and selling would begin to happen. Financial services would get in. New investors would also get in. And you would then have that virtuous cycle of transactions and revenue mutually supporting, contracts that are being followed, regulatory instructions being obeyed, and actually, finally, a market beginning to work that will be sending the right signals to the right market participants to which they would respond. Now, to come to the question I was specifically asked, what are the bold choices that we need to make? Electricity in Nigeria is a big elephant, right? Tail, leg, trunk, ears, and we all think that that is what the elephant is. So you tend to want to hear lots of solutions, right? But they're actually solutions that deal with only a little part of the problem. Let me say for the umpteenth time, the biggest challenge we have in this market is governance. You will not hear it from me too many times. You will never hear from me enough. I'm saying this from hard experience. I have a PhD from the University of Hard Knocks and Harrowing experience. Right? Only one decision, just one decision, has brought us here today. You know, I was having a discussion with someone, and the person said to me in retrospect, if my colleague Sam Amadi and you know, who took that decision, had taken 10 billion naira from the market,
it would have been better.
It would have been better. And left the market as it was. Because what you have is that one decision took a 214 billion problem that we had solved with the CBN NEMS facility, right? And today it's now 1.6 trillion. Right? But if you had said, take 10 billion and walk away, and let's just deal with the market the way it is, we wouldn't have that situation, that 1.6 trillion. In fact, there probably will be no debt on the balance sheet of the market. So decisions really, particularly regulatory and policy decisions, they have real life consequences.
But that brings it again back to politics, right?
It's not politics. Again, you have to look at the regulator. Regulators are a very special kind of animal. They have executive authority. They take and execute decisions. They have judicial authority. They settle disputes. They have legislative authority. They make orders and guidelines. Even the president of Nigeria does not have that power. It's awesome. If you have the right kind of person with the right kind of temperament, you can take decisions that affect Nigerian lives for the better or for the worse. Just one decision. Take away 30% collection loss out of the tariff on 25th of March 2015. Changed everything. And we're living in the consequences now. So, John, we don't have time to mollycoddle regulators, right? And watch them apply the milk of human kindness. A regulator that wants to take a decision that pleases everyone will fail. Woefully. Your job is not to balance interest. You're not Solomon. Your job is to drive efficiency. Drive it ruthlessly. Right? If you must sanction discos, look into their books and okay? They haven't looked at your books at all. On paper, the power is there, but nobody has come to look at your books. If they have, you guys will be paying fines. Big fines. Because you take inefficient decisions. Right? Bosses have retinue of escorts, blowing sirens, disco MDs. For what? You pay, I pay.
We are almost running, but there's a question I want you to answer before.
We can go on and on, Patrick.
I know.
But look, this thing about governance, I can't say it enough.
There's a question on
it changes everything.
What type of market do you hope to see, and do the existing regulations and framework, will it deliver it?
There is no type
we have
of
less
market,
than 2 minutes for that.
There's no type of market outside one in which I buy, or rather, I take my goods to the market, I deliver it according to the rules, according to my contract, and I get my money and I walk away. That's what the market is. There's no other type of market. And you buy and you sell. And the structures of that market are already in place in Nigeria. The question that NERC alone can answer for us, because NERC is the only entity that has the responsibility to design and therefore create a market and drive players, right? In 2011 to 2015, we had something called the Transition State Steering Group. I chaired it, right? NERC did not have any specific role in creating that market other than just pushing people together, knocking heads together, making sure that they do what they need to do. And by 2015, we're ready, right? So that's what you need to do. NERC needs to go back to what TEM was, what the structures are. If it needs to change a particular structure, and I think it does, I think that we need to actually look at radically redesigning the market. What we have has failed for various reasons, and we're simply rushing money down the drain, and we're trying to make a dead body walk, right? So you need to do some radical redesign to the structure of the market. But in essence, that end game of having discos enter into contracts with Gencos, receive energy and pay for it, you can never have to change that. It's the how. And until we have a conversation, which is why I keep saying to you, organize some kind of platform for everybody to talk. We haven't spoken to ourselves in 5 years. We keep having these siloed discussions, right? Until we have a discussion and we have a come to Jesus discussion, everybody tells the truth about himself, right? And we abuse each other, fight each other, and then on the last day, we'll work out a solution. Until that happens, everybody's just going to keep
We're working on it. We're working on it.
Make it happen.
We're working on it. Final words, Jumoke?
We've said a lot this evening, and I do agree that what some people call governance, what some people call market coordination, what some people call the independence of the regulator is required in a sector such as this, where there are so many players involved, so many stakeholders, in order to ensure that there is no chaos and that somebody is keeping track on the destination that we have set for ourselves. Yes.
Thank you, Frank.
We are on a journey, and we have got here because of the history that has been our country. And that history is made up of all sorts of circumstances, including political. But because we're on a journey, and for the electricity sector, a journey with a destination, which is the full-term market, I have a very strong belief, otherwise I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing, that we will get there. And all of the effort that we're making now is to make sure that the steps we take are assured, such that we can arrive at the destination sooner than we would otherwise.
Please, a round of applause for the panel. We set out to review Nigeria's electricity market reform landscape. I think we've done some level of justice to the topic. What is left now is to articulate everything that we've discussed and put it in front of the people who should be acting on them, right? right? And I'm sure that the folks from Nextier Power, will do that. Sometimes the question is, why do we continue to talk about this stuff, even in the face of a reality when it seems like nothing is happening? Maybe because we're involved in the space and we see the active effort being made by different parties to get this to work. And that is what continues to give us the confidence that we will figure it out. And today is better than yesterday. It's not as good as we want it to be, but we are trending in the right direction. And we continue to, seek that you continue to join us as we have these conversations. And one day, hopefully not too long from now, we will find the answers to this and we will stop having this dialogue. Thank you very much for coming out today. And you've been a wonderful audience. Thank you.